This lecture is an introduction to what plants are, as well as to major plant groups. So in this lecture, we're going to go over major evolutionary group of organisms, including prokaryotes or bacteria, eukaryotes, which is a group that includes animals, fungi, protists, algae, and plants. We will specify that algae are a kind of photosynthetic protist, and then we will go over the fact that plants evolved from green algae ancestors. Then we will talk about plants themselves. We will go over 5 groups. The first group is bryophytes, the second group Lycophytes, third ferns, fourth seed plants that include Gymnosperms, as well as Angiosperms. Gymnosperms are cone plants, Angiosperms are flowering plants. So let's start by talking about prokaryotes. Prokaryotes are one of the 2 major lineages of life. They are small, single-celled organisms, and they are comprised of cells, but their cellular contents are not divided by membranes. So everything within the cell is continuous without any membranes to separate it. There is no nucleus. You can see that there is DNA, but it is not separated by membranes from the remainder of the cell. And there's one important group of bacteria for the purposes of plants, and that is cyanobacteria. These are important because these are photosynthetic bacteria, and we will talk later in the semester about how they contributed chloroplasts to plant cells. The second major group of organisms are eukaryotes. So eukaryotes are all of the organisms that have larger cells. They may be single-celled or multicellular. And unlike prokaryotes, their cellular contents are divided by membranes. So just to emphasize this, the prokaryote down here is small, without membranes. The eukaryotic cell over here is both much larger, and you can see that within it, there are organelles, each that have their own membranes surrounding them. You can also see this section here. This is the nucleus. So eukaryotes have nuclei, which are membrane-bound organelles that contain the DNA. We're going to focus now on eukaryotes only. You can see on this diagram, down here we have 2 groups of prokaryotes. Everything above this line here are the eukaryotes. Within the eukaryotes there are several groups. The first group is the protists, which is pictured here. So protists are a fairly large variety of small or simple eukaryotes. So they're still eukaryotic cells with membranes, and the cells are still bigger than prokaryotes. However, relative to the other kinds of eukaryotes, the organisms are usually small. Algae are one example of protists. So we're going to use the term algae basically for photosynthetic protists. And this group is going to be important in our study of plants because the ancestor of terrestrial plants was in fact a green algae. Another group of another group of eukaryotes is the fungi, and they're pictured here, and you can see they cleverly drew this in the shape of a mushroom because the fungi include the organisms we would call mushrooms. Additionally, animals are eukaryotes, and so you can see this shark-like animal group over here. And finally, plants are another major lineage of eukaryotes. And you can see this leaf-like plant group over here. So we said already that plants evolved from green algae. However, there are some differences. We're going to see that plants have several adaptations that make them well suited for terrestrial life, meaning life on land. They also have a more complex life cycle than green algae, and when we talk about life cycles soon, we will specify what exactly is different. There are 5 major groups of plants, and my groupings differ somewhat from your textbook. So I will ask that you follow my groupings. The information in the textbook about the groups is fine, but the author lumps and splits them differently than I do. So when we talk about these 5 major plant groups, we're going to talk about 3 groups of non-seed plants and 2 groups of seed plants. The 3 non-seed plants are the bryophytes, lycophytes, and ferns. The 2 groups of seed plants are the gymnosperms. These are the seed plants with cones, and the angiosperms, and these are the seed plants with flowers. So it says seed plants here, but that should really say flowering plants. The bryophytes were the first of those groups. Remember, these are non-seed plants. These include the mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. This group does not have vascular tissue. Vascular tissue is tissue that is specialized for transporting water and nutrients. This group does not have seeds. It also does not have true leaves, true roots, or true stems. We'll say more later in the semester by exactly what we mean by true leaves, roots, and stems. The next group was the lycophytes. These, unlike the bryophytes, are vascular plants. However, similar to the bryophytes, these still do not have seeds. And what's going to distinguish them from the ferns is that they have only very small leaves with simple unbranched veins. So you can see these segments here that look kind of leaf-like. These are actually stems covered by very small scale-like leaves, and each one of those scale-like leaves has only one small vein. The next group then are another group of vascular non-seed plants, and these are the ferns. Ferns, unlike the lycophytes, have large leaves with multiple branched veins. So you can see a couple images of ferns down here, growing in a forest understory, and also a close-up of a fern here, with one large leaf up in the front. Each of these are small leaflets or pinnae coming off of them, and this is a complex leaf with many veins going to each leaflet. And oftentimes for ferns, we're going to see that there are spores, which are reproductive bodies, and they are on the leaf undersides. So this orangish color on this leaf and this leaf up here are really coatings of bodies that contain spores. Now we're going to shift to the seed plants. And the first group of seed plants we'll talk about are the gymnosperms. These are what we'll refer to as the cone plants because they have different varieties of cones. These are vascular. They are seed plants. These still have large leaves with multiple veins, so that's like the ferns. They make cones. They do not make flowers. And this includes 2 groups that your book talks about. Your book talks about the cycads and conifers, and those are true groups, but I think that they are better talked about together instead of separately. So we're going to include both of those in this category, gymnosperm. The final group is the group we are most familiar with. It is called the angiosperms, and these are the same thing as the flowering plants. These plants are still vascular plants. They are still seed plants like the gymnosperms. Like the gymnosperms and ferns, they have large leaves with multiple veins. However, the big difference between them and the gymnosperms is that they make flowers, not cones. And we'll talk more later in the semester about what exactly a flower is and what makes flowers especially useful for plants. So when you review this material, you should be able to answer the following questions. What are the differences we discussed between prokaryotes and eukaryotes? What are the 5 different groups of eukaryotes that we discussed? From what group did plants evolve? What are the 5 different groups of plants that I outlined? Which of these groups have vascular tissue? Which of these groups make seeds? which of these groups have large leaves with multiple veins.